She lay on the roadside, frozen, exhausted, her eyes filled with fear. Passing cars didn't even slow down, leaving her to die alone. She no longer hoped for rescue. She had once trusted a human, and that trust had shattered her life into pieces. But when a car stopped in front of her and footsteps approached, she had no idea that this moment would change everything. And ahead of her lay something she wasn't ready for. The shepherd lay on the frozen ground, curled into a tight ball, as if trying to disappear, to dissolve into the darkness. Her emaciated body barely moved with each weak, painful breath. Her chest burned from the cold and exhaustion. Her dirty, matted fur no longer protected her from the icy wind, and the deep scratches on her paws burned like fire. She didn't know how long it had been since she was left here, on the side of this desolate road. A few hours? A day? Maybe longer? Time had lost all meaning. She had stopped waiting. Once, she had a home. She faintly remembered the warmth of her bed, the soft clatter of a food bowl against the floor, the kind voice calling her name. But that voice no longer called. Those hands no longer stroked her head. Instead, all that was left was the cold asphalt beneath her wounded paws and the pain that consumed her body. She had been discarded like a worthless thing. She had run after the car as fast as she could until her paws bled, until her lungs burned from the sharp air, until she collapsed, too weak to continue. She had called for them, hoping they would come back, that it had been a mistake. But they never returned. At first, she waited. Then she tried to find food. Then she simply stopped moving. She had no strength left. Headlights flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating her silhouette before fading away. No one stopped. Some even sped up as they passed. To them, she was just a dirty speck on the road, another piece of debris scattered on the roadside of life. Her eyes, once full of life, now reflected only fear and despair. She didn't try to stand. She knew there was no point. And then he appeared. The hum of an engine, the sound of brakes. The car slowed, then stopped. The creak of an opening door broke the deafening silence of the night. Footsteps. They were coming closer. Her battered body tensed. Only instinct remained. If the threat got too close, she would try to crawl away, to hide in the bushes, to do something. But her legs wouldn't obey. The man crouched beside her. His scent was different. It didn't smell of anger, of sweat and cigarettes, of fear. He reached out a hand. She flinched. But the hand didn't strike. It didn't shove. It didn't grab her scruff like they had before. It simply rested there, waiting. "It's okay, girl. I won't hurt you." A voice. Low, gentle, without command, without threat. It was warm. She wanted to believe him, but people always lie. She closed her eyes and went still, deciding, if he was going to hurt her, let it be quick. But the pain never came. Only warm breath and a patient, steady voice that, for some reason, didn't feel like a stranger. Pain shot through her body as she lunged forward, trying to escape. A searing burn tore through her leg, but fear was stronger than pain. It crashed over her in waves, tightened around her chest, made her heart hammer wildly. She didn't know who he was, didn't know why he was here, but she knew one thing: people always bring pain. She jumped, but her body betrayed her. Her legs gave out, buckling beneath her, and she collapsed onto her side. Her lungs gasped for air, her body fought to rise again, but there was no strength left. She shut her eyes, bracing for the blow, the command, the anger. But nothing happened. The man didn't move. He didn't come closer, didn't grab her, didn't try to force her submission. He just sat beside her. "You're scared. I understand." His voice barely reached her through the rushing blood in her ears. It was low, soft, free of threat. She opened her eyes. He was still there. She could smell him. His scent was different. It didn't reek of anger. It didn't smell of smoke or motor oil. It didn't carry the sharp tang of fear. It smelled warm. She didn't know why that feeling seemed so strange. Had she forgotten what safety smelled like? She swallowed hard. A battle raged inside her. Run or stay? But her legs wouldn't move anyway. So she just lay still. The man didn't take advantage of her weakness. He didn't reach out, didn't try to grab her. Instead, he simply extended his hand, palm up, waiting. She flinched, but he didn't touch her. He just waited. And then, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. For a moment. She lowered her head, pressing herself against the ground, but she didn't try to run. In that moment, fear loosened its grip. In that moment, she simply breathed. The walk to the car was difficult. Every jolt, every movement sent sharp pain through her legs and sides. But the pain wasn't as terrifying as the feeling slowly creeping through her, unease. When he carefully lifted her into his arms, she growled, even though she had no strength left to resist. The sound was weak, muffled, but it was a warning. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. She had been lifted before, and that time it ended with a fall onto cold asphalt. But he didn't let go. He only held her closer, then gently wrapped her in a soft blanket. The car was warm, but she didn't relax. Her muscles stayed tense. Her eyes remained open, even as exhaustion pressed in too close. She studied his profile, every movement, every gesture of his hands. His eyes didn't gleam with cruelty. His lips didn't press into a thin line of irritation. But how many times had she trusted before? She wouldn't be fooled. When they stopped, he lifted her again and carefully carried her inside. She noticed the difference immediately. The air smelled of wood, something sweet, slightly bitter, warm. There was no scent of fear in this house, no traces of dirt, cold, or motor oil. He placed her on a soft blanket. She didn't move. The house was quiet. No sudden sounds that made her flinch. No yelling. No raised hands. But warmth was more dangerous than the cold, because warmth brought back memories. She saw another home, the one that had once been hers. She remembered the soft bed by the couch, the warm glow of a lamp, a voice calling her name, so gently, so calmly. But that voice no longer called. Now she remembered standing in confusion on the side of the road, watching his car drive away. Remembered looking into the eyes of the one she loved, and how he didn't even turn back. Remembered the hand that once stroked her head so fondly, now gripping the steering wheel, steady, unwavering. Remembered the door slamming shut in front of her. The crack of it, the way the cold loneliness swallowed her whole. Rage flared inside her suddenly, like embers catching in the wind. This man, did he want to tame her too? Did he expect her to trust again? To hope again? No, she wouldn't allow it. She snapped at him, though she knew she was too weak to bite. Avoided his hands, even when they only placed a bowl of food in front of her. Flinched at every movement. He did nothing in return. Didn't yell, didn't raise his hands, didn't try to force her submission. He simply stayed, watched, waited. Days turned into nights. She couldn't remember the last time she was given food just like that. No conditions, no fear that it would be taken away. She ate cautiously, warily, but she ate. The pain in her legs began to fade. Her body grew stronger. She could breathe, but she couldn't forget. Rage still burned in her chest, because trust kills. and she could never afford to be weak again. Several weeks had passed. Time no longer felt like a frozen void, stretched thin between pain and fear. It flowed differently now. Every morning began with the quiet footsteps of the man who came in to check on her. Every evening ended with the soft glow of a lamp and the steady breathing of the one who now lived beside her. The shepherd no longer looked like she was dying. Her coat had regained its shine, her legs had grown stronger, and the fragile shadow of fear in her eyes had begun to fade, giving way to cautious curiosity. She no longer flinched at every movement, no longer curled into a ball in the corner when she heard the sound of a closing door. The man called her Lexi. At first it was just a sound, strange, foreign, meaningless, but over time that sound became something more. Lexi. When he said it, there was no command in his voice, no demand for obedience, only calmness. A quiet certainty that this name belonged to her. She didn't know why he had chosen it, but it no longer felt unfamiliar. She was beginning to let herself trust. Carefully, with hesitation lurking in the back of her mind, but she was moving forward. She was learning again. Learning that hands could be gentle, not harsh and cruel. Learning that food could be given freely, without fear of it being taken away. Learning that a voice could be kind, even when it was loud. But the fear never disappeared completely. It lived deep inside her, tucked away in the darkest corner of her mind, always whispering, "This has happened before." And then came that day. The man opened the door for the first time. She froze. Freedom. Fresh air rushed into the room, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant cars. A gust of wind ruffled her fur. She could leave. She could run outside, vanish, become her own again. No one would stop her. No one would slam the door shut. No one would chase after her. The man didn't call her back. He simply stood there, silently watching. She took a step forward. Another. The wind pushed against her, and for a moment, she almost tasted freedom. The same freedom that had once been bitter, steeped in loneliness and pain. But then she stopped. The world outside felt just as cold as the day she had been left behind. She looked over her shoulder. The man hadn't moved. Inside, the house was warm. There was no pain there, and someone was waiting for her. She turned and took a step back. Lexi came home. Not because she was forced, because in that house she was no longer abandoned. She had found home again.